Good day, friends, and welcome back to Conflicts of the Human Race. Today, I will tell you about the entire story of the Mongol invasions and conquests. 1206 1368. Now buckle up as we begin. In the vast windswept steppes of Mongolia, where survival demanded absolute toughness, a warrior named Temujin was born around 1162. His early life was marked by betrayal, hardship, and constant tribal warfare. After his father was poisoned by rival Tartars, young Temujin's family was abandoned by their tribe, forced to survive on their own in the harsh wilderness. Yet these brutal experiences forged an iron will and strategic mind that would eventually unite the fractured Mongol tribes. Through cunning alliances, ruthless elimination of enemies, and innovative military tactics, Temujin slowly built a coalition of loyal followers. By 1206, he had achieved what many thought impossible, uniting the disparate Mongol clans under his leadership and taking the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. The Great Kurultai of 1206 marked a pivotal moment in world history as Mongol chieftains gathered to formally proclaim Temujin as Genghis Khan, the great Khan of all Mongols. This wasn't merely a ceremonial crowning, but the birth of a military machine unlike any the world had seen. Genghis Khan immediately set about organizing his forces with revolutionary efficiency. He abolished traditional tribal distinctions, instead organizing his army into decimal units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 called tumens. Merit replaced birth status, and loyalty to the Khan superseded all tribal bonds. The Mongol military code, the Yasa, established strict discipline and unity of command. These weren't just raiders anymore, but a professional army with sophisticated intelligence networks, siege warfare capabilities, and psychological warfare tactics. Genghis Khan's vision extended far beyond the steppes. He began planning campaigns that would carry Mongol banners across continents, driven by an unquenchable ambition to rule all lands under the eternal blue sky. The Western Xia Kingdom became Genghis Khan's first major testing ground beyond the steppes in 1209. This Tangut state controlled crucial silk road trade routes and possessed sophisticated fortification systems that would challenge Mongol siege capabilities. The campaign revealed both Mongol adaptability and ruthless pragmatism. Initially frustrated by walled cities, the Mongols quickly learned siege warfare techniques, employing Chinese engineers and adopting enemy technologies. They diverted rivers to flood cities, used catapults and siege towers, and most effectively employed psychological warfare through calculated brutality. Cities that surrendered were often spared, while those that resisted faced complete destruction and massacre of their populations. This calculated terror became a Mongol trademark, causing many future enemies to surrender without fighting. The Western Xia campaign lasted intermittently until 1227, serving as a training ground for larger conquests. More importantly, it established the Mongol pattern of cultural and technological absorption, incorporating the best elements of conquered civilizations into their own military machine, while maintaining their core identity as steppe warriors. In 1211, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the Jin dynasty, marking the beginning of one of history's most consequential invasions. The Jin ruled northern China from their capital at Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, commanding vast resources and sophisticated military technology. However, their forces were largely static, designed for defensive warfare against traditional nomadic raids, not the coordinated campaigns Genghis Khan unleashed. The Mongols systematically devastated Jin territories, capturing key cities and incorporating Chinese siege specialists and administrators into their ranks. The siege of Zhongdu in 1240–1215 demonstrated evolved Mongol tactics, combining traditional mobility with learned siege craft. When the city finally fell, the destruction was so complete that it served as a stark warning to other potential resistors. The Jin campaign wasn't merely about conquest, but transformation. The Mongols began adopting Chinese administrative systems, while maintaining their military supremacy. This cultural synthesis would become a hallmark of Mongol rule, allowing them to govern diverse populations effectively while expanding their technological and tactical capabilities for future conquests across Eurasia. Between 1218 and 1221, the Khwarezmid Empire faced the full fury of Mongol vengeance following the massacre of Mongol merchants and diplomats at Otrar. This campaign marked Genghis Khan's entry into the Islamic world and demonstrated Mongol warfare at its most systematic and devastating. The Shah's empire, stretching from Iran to Central Asia, possessed formidable cities and armies, but lacked the unity and coordination to face Mongol strategy. Genghis Khan divided his forces, striking multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining communication across vast distances. Cities like Bokhara, Samarkand, and Merv fell in sequence, each destruction more complete than the last. The siege of Merv reportedly resulted in over 1 million deaths, while Bokhara was burned so thoroughly that it never fully recovered its former glory. The campaign showcased Mongol psychological warfare at its peak cities that surrendered faced selective destruction and population displacement, while those that resisted faced total annihilation. This calculated brutality served strategic purposes, causing distant cities to surrender without siege. The Khwarezmid campaign established Mongol dominance in Central Asia and opened pathways to Europe and the Middle East. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 marked a critical transition for the Mongol Empire, but rather than fragmenting, it expanded under his carefully planned succession. His third son, Urjadeh Khan, assumed leadership in 1229 after a brief regency, inheriting not just an empire but a sophisticated military and administrative system. Urjadeh proved an incapable leader, combining his father's strategic vision with improved organizational skills. He established Karakorum as the Mongol capital and created a more centralized government while maintaining the decimal military structure that had proved so effective. Under Urjadeh's direction, the Mongols simultaneously launched campaigns in multiple directions, completing the conquest of the Jin dynasty in China, invading Korea, and preparing for the massive westward expansion into Europe. His reign marked the empire's golden age of expansion, characterized by improved communication systems, religious tolerance, and cultural integration. The Yam postal system connected distant territories, while merchants and artisans enjoyed unprecedented protection along trade routes. Urjadeh's court welcomed scholars, engineers, and administrators from conquered territories, creating a truly cosmopolitan center of power that would facilitate the next phase of global conquest. The Mongol invasion of Europe began in earnest in 1237 under the leadership of Batu Khan and the tactical genius Subutai. The Russian principalities, weakened by internal divisions and unfamiliar with Mongol warfare, fell in rapid succession. The siege of Ryazan in December 1237 set the pattern: complete destruction for those who resisted, harsh tribute for those who submitted. Moscow fell without significant resistance, while Kiev, the jewel of medieval Russia, endured a devastating siege in 1240 that left the city in ruins. The Mongols' winter campaigns shocked European observers, who considered such military operations impossible in the harsh Russian climate. However, Mongol logistics and mobility actually benefited from frozen rivers that facilitated rapid movement and supply. Cities that had never faced such systematic siege warfare found their defenses inadequate against Mongol engineering corps, many composed of Chinese and Muslim specialists. The psychological impact extended far beyond military defeat. The very concept of European Christendom's invincibility crumbled as news of Mongol victories spread westward. By 1240, the Mongols controlled all major Russian cities and prepared to carry their conquest into the heart of medieval Europe. The battles of Mohyj and Legnica in 1241 marked the high tide of Mongol expansion into Europe, demonstrating that Western European military might could not stand against Mongol tactics and leadership. At Mohyr in Hungary, Batu Khan and Subutai faced King Bela IV's Hungarian army, which included heavily armored knights and crossbowmen. The Mongols employed their classic feigned retreat, drawing the Hungarian cavalry into a trap where superior mobility and coordinated archery devastated the European forces. Simultaneously, at Legnica in Silesia, another Mongol force destroyed a Polish-German army that included Teutonic knights. The death of Duke Henry II of Silesia shocked European nobility, while Mongol psychological warfare, including the use of captured European equipment and standards to create confusion, proved devastatingly effective. These victories opened the path to Vienna and beyond, causing panic across medieval Europe. Pope Gregory IX called for crusade, while European monarchs desperately sought allies against this unprecedented threat. However, news of Urgide Khan's death in December 1241 forced Mongol commanders to return east for the succession Kurultai, inadvertently saving Europe from further conquest and fundamentally altering world history. Mongol Khan's ascension in 1251 marked a new phase of systematic expansion, with the empire now organized for simultaneous campaigns across multiple fronts. His strategic vision encompassed the completion of Song dynasty conquest in southern China, while extending Mongol power into the Islamic heartlands of the Middle East. Mongol's administrative reforms centralized imperial authority while maintaining the flexibility that had made Mongol expansion so successful. He commissioned detailed censuses, standardized taxation, and established clear chains of command extending from Karakoram to distant battlefields. The Khan's court became increasingly sophisticated, incorporating advisors from Chinese, Persian, Arab, and European backgrounds while maintaining essential Mongol military traditions. Under his direction, the empire reached unprecedented organizational efficiency, with coordinated intelligence networks, standardized equipment production, and systematic recruitment of specialists from conquered territories. Mongol's reign represented the maturation of Mongol imperial administration, transforming a confederation of tribal armies into a true world empire. His strategic planning laid groundwork for the campaigns that would establish Mongol dynasties in China, Persia, and Central Asia, while his emphasis on meritocracy and religious tolerance helped consolidate control over diverse populations spanning from Eastern Europe to the Pacific. The Mongol conquest of Baghdad in 1258 under Hulagu Khan stands among history's most devastating cultural disasters, ending the Islamic Golden Age and destroying centuries of accumulated knowledge. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim's refusal to submit triggered a siege that combined Mongol military efficiency with systematic cultural destruction. Baghdad, once the world's largest city and center of Islamic learning, fell after brief resistance, leading to massacres that reportedly killed hundreds of thousands. The destruction of the House of Wisdom, containing irreplaceable manuscripts and scientific works, symbolized the campaign's cultural impact. Rivers allegedly ran black with ink from destroyed books and red with blood from slaughtered scholars. Hulagu's forces demonstrated typical Mongol pragmatism by sparing Christians and Jews while targeting Muslim religious and political leadership. The campaign established the Ilkhanate, a Mongol dynasty ruling Persia and Mesopotamia, but permanently altered the Islamic world's political and intellectual landscape. The fall of Baghdad marked the end of unified Islamic leadership under the Abbasid Caliphate, fragmenting Muslim political authority and shifting power centers. This conquest demonstrated Mongol capability to destroy even the most sophisticated urban civilizations while establishing new ruling structures. Kublai Khan's rise to power in 1260 marked both the zenith of Mongol expansion and the beginning of imperial fragmentation. His vision extended beyond mere conquest to the creation of a Chinese dynasty that would legitimize Mongol rule over the world's most populous civilization. The establishment of the Yuan dynasty represented a fundamental shift in Mongol strategy, from nomadic conquest to sedentary administration of complex agricultural societies. Kublai's court in Beijing became a cosmopolitan center, attracting merchants, scholars, and adventurers from across the known world, including Marco Polo's famous family. The Khan balanced Mongol military traditions with Chinese governmental structures, employing Confucian scholars while maintaining Mongol supremacy in key positions. His reign saw unprecedented cultural exchange as the Pax Mongolica facilitated trade and communication across Eurasia. However, Kublai's focus on China and his adoption of Chinese imperial customs created tensions with other Mongol Khanates, leading to civil wars that permanently fractured the unified empire. Despite these challenges, his rule marked the height of Mongol cultural achievement, with religious tolerance, artistic patronage, and technological innovation flourishing under imperial protection, while Mongol armies completed the conquest of Song China. The Mongol invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281 marked rare failures in the empire's expansion, demonstrating that even Mongol military superiority had limits when facing determined resistance and adverse conditions. Kublai Khan's first invasion force of approximately 30,000 troops faced fierce resistance from samurai warriors, whose fighting spirit and superior individual combat skills proved formidable. Japanese defensive tactics, including night raids and guerrilla warfare, disrupted Mongol logistics, while unfamiliar coastal terrain negated traditional cavalry advantages. The invasion fleet's withdrawal after initial coastal battles was attributed to both Japanese resistance and approaching storms. The second invasion in 1281 proved more catastrophic for Mongol ambitions. A massive combined fleet carrying over 100,000 troops from Korea and southern China represented one of history's largest amphibious operations. However, Japanese defenders had prepared extensive coastal fortifications while maintaining their fierce resistance. The campaign's decisive moment came when a typhoon destroyed much of the invasion fleet, drowning thousands of Mongol and allied troops. This divine wind, or kamikaze, became legendary in Japanese culture as supernatural protection of the homeland. The failed invasions demonstrated Mongol limitations in naval warfare and island conquest, while establishing Japan's isolation from continental political control. By 1300, the unified Mongol Empire had effectively fragmented into 4 distinct khanates, each developing unique cultural characteristics while maintaining nominal connections to the Great Khan in China. The Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan's successors controlled China and Mongolia, becoming increasingly Chinese in character as Mongol rulers adopted Confucian governmental practices and Buddhist religious beliefs. The Ilkhanate in Persia and Mesopotamia gradually converted to Islam, with rulers like Genghis Khan embracing Persian administrative traditions while maintaining Mongol military organization. The Golden Horde controlled the Russian steppes and Eastern Europe, extracting tribute from Russian principalities while maintaining traditional nomadic lifestyle and eventually adopting Islam. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia remained most faithful to original Mongol customs, controlling crucial Silk Road routes while resisting complete cultural assimilation. This fragmentation reflected the empire's fundamental challenge, governing diverse sedentary populations while preserving nomadic Mongol identity. Each khanate faced unique pressures from local populations, religious authorities, and economic conditions. Trade and diplomatic connections continued between the khanates, but unified military campaigns became impossible as regional interests superseded imperial unity. The Pax Mongolica persisted in facilitating cultural and commercial exchange, but political cohesion steadily weakened. The Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 marked the first major defeat of a Mongol army in open battle, halting their expansion into Egypt and North Africa while establishing Mamluk military reputation. Hulagu Khan's withdrawal of most Ilkhanate forces to participate in succession disputes left only a small force under Kitbuka to hold conquered Syrian territories. The Mamluk Sultan Qutuz, recognizing this opportunity, assembled an army that combined traditional Islamic military tactics with lessons learned from previous defeats by Mongol forces. At Ain Jalut in the Jezreel Valley, the Mamluks employed the Mongols' own feigned retreat strategy, drawing Kitbuka's forces into a trap where superior numbers and prepared positions neutralized Mongol mobility advantages. The death of Kitbuka and destruction of his army sent shockwaves through the Mongol world, demonstrating that their forces could be defeated by well-prepared enemies using appropriate tactics. This victory preserved Islamic rule in Egypt and North Africa while limiting Mongol expansion to regions already conquered. The psychological impact proved as significant as the military result, inspiring resistance movements throughout the Islamic world and establishing the Mamluks as champions of Islam against Mongol expansion. The reign of Toghon Temür, the last Yuan emperor, from 1333 to 1368, exemplified the challenges facing Mongol dynasties as they became increasingly removed from their nomadic origins. Natural disasters, including Yellow River floods and widespread famine, combined with administrative corruption and excessive taxation to create popular unrest throughout China. The Red Turban Rebellion, led by peasant armies claiming religious inspiration, systematically challenged Yuan authority, while Mongol forces proved inadequate for controlling vast territories with traditional steppe tactics. Toghon Temür's court had become thoroughly Chinese in character, with Mongol rulers more interested in imperial luxuries than military campaigns or administrative efficiency. The emperor's attempts at reform came too late to restore confidence or effective governance. Chinese resentment against foreign rule, suppressed for over a century, exploded into coordinated uprisings that the Yuan military could not contain. Regional commanders increasingly acted independently, while the central government's authority crumbled. The empire that had once coordinated campaigns across continents now struggled to maintain communication between provinces as rebel armies approached Beijing. The last Yuan emperor prepared for the inevitable end of Mongol rule in China, marking the conclusion of their greatest dynastic achievement and the beginning of the Ming Restoration. The rise of Zhu Yuanzhang from peasant rebel to founder of the Ming dynasty represented the complete reversal of Mongol fortunes in China and the restoration of native Chinese rule after nearly a century of foreign domination. Beginning as a Buddhist monk and minor rebel leader, Zhu's strategic acumen and organizational abilities gradually united various anti-Yuan forces under his leadership. His Red Turban army combined traditional Chinese military tactics with new technologies and administrative systems learned during the period of Mongol rule. The siege of Beijing in 1368 proceeded systematically, with Ming forces cutting off Yuan supply lines and isolating the capital while avoiding costly direct assaults. When the city finally fell, Toghon Temür fled northward to Mongolia rather than face capture, carrying the Yuan imperial seal and maintaining claims to legitimacy from the steppes. Zhu's establishment of the Ming dynasty marked not just military victory, but cultural restoration, as Chinese governmental systems, artistic traditions, and social hierarchies were deliberately revived to erase Mongol influence. However, the Ming inheritance included many Mongol innovations in administration, military organization, and international trade that had proved beneficial. The fall of the Yuan demonstrated that even successful nomadic conquest dynasties faced inevitable challenges when governing sedentary agricultural civilizations over extended periods. The retreat to Mongolia marked the beginning of the Northern Yuan period, as displaced Mongol rulers maintained imperial claims while struggling to rebuild their power base in traditional steppe territories. Toghon Temür and his successors faced the enormous challenge of reasserting control over Mongol tribes that had grown independent during the Yuan dynasty's focus on Chinese affairs. The steppes themselves had changed during the century of Chinese rule, with many Mongols having adopted sedentary lifestyles or served in Yuan administrative positions rather than maintaining traditional nomadic warrior culture. However, the return to Mongolia also represented an opportunity to restore authentic Mongol identity, free from Chinese cultural influence. The Northern Yuan court attempted to maintain diplomatic relations with Ming China while rebuilding military capabilities and tribal alliances. This period saw efforts to revive traditional Mongol religious practices, military organization, and political structures that had been modified during the Yuan period. Despite these efforts, the Northern Yuan never achieved the unity or power that had characterized earlier Mongol states. Tribal fragmentation, resource limitations, and pressure from expanding Ming military expeditions prevented effective consolidation of Mongol territory. The dream of reconquering China remained alive, but increasingly unrealistic as generations passed. Throughout the 14th century, the Golden Horde's control over Eastern Europe and Russia gradually weakened as internal succession disputes, pressure from expanding Lithuanian and Polish powers, and growing Russian resistance undermined Mongol authority. The rise of Moscow under Ivan I and his successors represented a fundamental shift in the balance of power, as Russian princes began coordinating resistance rather than merely competing for Mongol favor. Dmitry Donskoy's victory at the Battle of Kulikovo in 1380 demonstrated that Russian forces could defeat Mongol armies in open battle, even though Tokhtamysh's subsequent revenge campaign temporarily restored Horde dominance. The conversion of Golden Horde rulers to Islam had created additional tensions with Orthodox Christian subjects, while failing to provide the administrative benefits that Islamic conversion had brought to other Mongol khanates. Economic problems, including disrupted trade routes and reduced tribute collection, further weakened Horde military capabilities. The fragmentation of the Golden Horde into smaller khanates, Crimean, Kazan, and Astrakhan, reflected both internal Mongol political disputes and external pressures from expanding Russian, Lithuanian, and Ottoman powers. By the late 14th century, the unified Mongol control that had once dominated Eastern Europe existed only in memory. The final collapse of Mongol power occurred gradually across different regions during the 14th and early 15th centuries, marked by the rise of new powers that either conquered or absorbed the remaining Mongol khanates. Timur's campaigns in the 1390s devastated the Golden Horde and weakened the Ilkhanate, while his defeat of the Ottoman Empire temporarily altered Middle Eastern power balances. However, Timur's death in 1405 prevented his planned conquest of Ming China, marking the end of the last great steppe conqueror in the Mongol tradition. The Ilkhanate had already fragmented into smaller Persian and Turkmen states, while the Chagatai Khanate split between settled Transoxiana and nomadic Mogulistan. In China, Ming expeditions into Mongolia prevented any serious attempt at Yuan restoration, while the Northern Yuan gradually became merely one among many competing Mongol tribal confederations. The rise of the Ottoman Empire, Safavid Persia, Mughal India, and Muscovite Russia created new regional powers that inherited various aspects of Mongol administrative and military traditions while rejecting Mongol political authority. The last symbolic end came with the Chinese capture of the Yuan imperial seal, officially terminating Mongol claims to universal empire. However, Mongol cultural influence persisted in the governmental systems, military organizations, and trade networks of successor states across Eurasia. The Mongol legacy extends far beyond military conquest, fundamentally reshaping world history through cultural exchange, technological transfer, and the creation of the first truly global trade network. From 1206 to 1368, Mongol rule connected civilizations from Europe to Asia, facilitating the spread of ideas, technologies, and diseases that would define subsequent centuries. The Pax Mongolica enabled safe passage for merchants, scholars, and missionaries along the Silk Road, while Mongol administrative innovations influenced governmental systems from Russia to Iran. Their religious tolerance, meritocratic principles, and cultural synthesis created unprecedented opportunities for cross-cultural learning and technological advancement. However, the environmental and demographic impacts were equally profound, with population losses in some regions requiring centuries for recovery. The Mongol emphasis on written law, census systems, and efficient communication networks established precedents that successor states would adapt and expand. Perhaps most significantly, Mongol conquests demonstrated the possibility of truly global empire while revealing its inherent limitations and challenges. Their rise from nomadic obscurity to world dominance remains one of history's most remarkable achievements, forever changing our understanding of military capability, political organization, and cultural interaction. If you liked today's story, make sure to check out our other videos on our channel. Have a nice day.